two incomes. And then there's two parents that have to juggle, being there for their kids or showing up in other ways at home is one of the biggest changes in gender dynamics over the last 50 years, is dual income households.
And you spoke about a very important thing that as the society that we haven't, I would say, that have accepted in a way of the thing of women having that helping hand, because I've seen in the West how it is, but here in this side in South Africa, we still have that thing of a woman shouldn't work. So it's quite in a way, their audiences, their listeners who are definitely all over the world listening to this. How can one just, in terms of taking the step of men, then of normalizing, of being in with the new norms of what we do, what is acceptable within the society?
I think it's an ongoing, evolving conversation. But the first thing that I emphasize in my book is the importance of knowing what you want as a man, as a person, as a human, and not just doing something because you think you're supposed to do it, right? Because having a relationship takes a lot of work. It's a huge commitment. And, having children, same thing. It's a huge commitment. That's something. Be aware of if you're ready to do that, if you're ready to make that commitment, because that's a big ask. And that is the first thing I always want to emphasize, especially for mental health. Doing something because you want to do it, because you're excited to do it, because you're invested in it, because you're committed to it, because you're eager to see how you can contribute is different than going into something because you think you're supposed to, because you think you have no choice, because you're being pressured. And that's where sometimes mental health does suffer, because at the end of the day, feeling empowered and in charge of your own life is really important.
Aside from that thing of people thinking that I should do this because there's certain endurance that, or self-care one does a different way, and it works different from there. If you thinking that sitting in a bar holding your wine would work for you, it might not work for you as an individual. So that you need to accept. It goes back to that thing of, as much as other people might go to therapy, that doesn't mean therapy will work for you. Same thing with medicine, with meds. If a certain person takes meds, don't think that those things will work for you. It's something that, like, I've learned. I saw an interview today where this guy said that when it comes to pills for depression, anxiety, there are different combinations where a certain person looks in terms of they don't know what works for them, but they are trying, and it is really costly in terms of that. I just want to talk about this someone that and the slogan. So can you break it down for us in terms of what does it mean to the audience who are not familiar with it?
Well, I just want to speak to what you said real quick about, I 100% agree, right? And that's part of what I want to emphasize is, but figure out what works for you. Right? Don't just say, well, I tried that worked for so-and-so, or this influencer said that doesn't resonate with me. Don't just focus on what's not working. Dedicate time and energy to yourself to figure out what does work, because at the end of the day, every person deserves to live a healthy and empowered life. And so if you're struggling with depression, if you're struggling with anxiety, and you're like, okay, well, I don't think that works, or that medicine, I tried it, or therapy might not be my thing, that's fine. But figure out what does work for you, because you deserve to have a healthy and full life. So that would be something I would just emphasize.
And also the question in terms of what does the strong one mean? Can you elaborate more?
Yeah, absolutely. So STRONG is an acronym of, just the things that make a difference when it comes to having a healthy relationship. Strong is an easy word to remember, and strong is healthy, right? Because sometimes what I found was, healthy is a big word. It's a big concept, but breaking it down into these 6 letters. So S is safety, having a safe relationship. Trust is so important in a long-term relationship. You have to be able to trust your partner, and they have to be able to trust you. I mean, that's kind of foundational. The R is respect, having mutual respect for each other in the relationship. So that's kind of the first fundamental pieces of the puzzle of a healthy relationship: safety, trust, and respect. If you don't have safety, trust, and respect in your relationship, it's probably not going to be healthy. And then once you have that under your belt, going into what makes a relationship not just good, but great, is that openness, nurturing, and generosity, where you are open, you can be yourself with your partner, you genuinely know that your partner likes you, you can talk about your futures together, you can be open about your hopes and dreams. They're able to work with you when you have any kind of conflict. They're not your enemy. They want to collaborate with you. They're open to being flexible, changing their opinion, changing their mindset, working together with you to find good solutions. Nurturing, that both of you, again, if you choose to have a family, you have investment into creating a family that you will be proud of. That's the nurturing piece. And then generosity is just kind of what I call like the fairy dust of a healthy relationship, is, that little extra piece of thinking about your partner, going out of your way to giving them a little bit of affection, the things that, it's a little special. It's the magic of a healthy relationship.
Through you actually explaining it, and as I've said, in terms of getting in a relationship, quite hard, and it took me back in terms of how I had looked up on relationships and now, and it really makes sense in terms of if you don't have all these things, a relationship is bound in, I would say. And something as men, in a way, some of the things we look at, for example, safety within the norm, trust is quite difficult in a way. Actually, one of the things that I realized that I've seen myself, it's being open, talking about not knowing that how this certain person will react if I tell her about my problems. So, in your experience as a therapist, what are some of the main things that you have seen people, men don't have?
Well, I think a lot of people don't have it. I mean, this is part of why I went to therapy also myself, is I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship. I didn't, these things are not taught in school. And so I think that's the thing I really want to emphasize, is what I want to share is the hope of skill building. One thing I've come to know about a lot of men is they're very action oriented. They're very logical. They want to know the steps. They want to know the skills and the tools. Like, how do I do it? I don't want to just hear about the problem. I also want to hear about the solution. And so part of me writing this book, you can't jump to openness if you're with somebody who doesn't respect you, who you don't trust, and you don't feel safe with. But if you start with that, you feel safe with them, trust each other, you feel respected by them. Like maybe you did share with them a little bit about your history and your past, and they don't look at you any differently. If anything, they look at you and they're like, wow, you're so brave for sharing this with me. I respect you so much for being somebody who is brave enough to address these things and then talk about them and share your story. That's going to be somebody who you're going to feel confident being open with, right? And so that's kind of why I wanted to break these things down into kind of a formula of, if you're a man and you're like, I don't even know where to start. Like there's so many different messages on social media. There's so many different, people saying this and that. This is my kind of offering of like, look, start with finding somebody who you feel safe with, somebody who's not going to use something against you, somebody who even in a conflict is not going to call you names, is not going to raise their voice or throw things at you. They're able to still use their words and moderate their bodies. They're able to let you know what they need in order to repair. Somebody who you can trust, who you don't have to be checking up on or feeling like they're sneaking around on you. Somebody who is trustworthy, that if they give you their word is their bond, and you can build that trust with them. Somebody who respects you and you respect them. Once you have all of that, the openness kind of comes easier.
And you really mentioned something that healthy relationship. And I feel like I just want to take it in terms of this modern days, in terms of the relationship. What I've seen is the fact that people have switched things up, are toxic, are seen as healthy. And also when it comes to relationships, it's quite fascinating because it really goes deeply in terms of, are you willing to be in a healthy relationship, or are you just want to be in this facade in terms of in this relationship that I'm in? I'm in a healthy relationship, whereas there's no respect for things that I have seen and realized that this thing won't work for me. Because two things that they are very important if I can't trust you, first you probably come in a relationship and expect something that we all need to have. It should be a necessity, not just in relationship, but in overall when you engage with people. Because I feel like that's how most men, in terms of having that low self-esteem, not thinking that they will achieve things because they are not respected. And so it's something that as individuals we need to, as I should say, people like me who are mental health advocates, like people who are in this field in terms of emphasizing that. And speaking about the thing of respect and trust, the most worst thing that men haven't mastered is emotional intelligence. One of the things, emotional intelligence and self-awareness, one of the things that I keep on emphasizing whenever I talk about this conversation, I would say, how can men master this thing, self-awareness?
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because self-awareness, I think that's part of what, again, it doesn't have to be a therapist, but it's difficult to be self-aware in a vacuum. Right. It's like, first you can start with self-knowledge and self-investigation, asking yourself some deep questions, but then, asking friends and getting feedback from your community or from trusted mentors or from a therapist of, how do you perceive me? How am I showing up? I think I'm showing up with integrity, but is that your experience of me? Because that's also really where, I've seen where people are not respected in their home. Sometimes it's because their partner is not interested in respecting them, and it's not a healthy relationship. But sometimes it's people are not showing up within their own integrity, right? They're not holding themselves accountable to what they say they're going to do. They're not showing self-respect with bettering themselves or seeking out mentorship or community. And that's really that piece of, you can be self-aware in a bubble up to a point, and then getting that feedback from a trusted friend or elder or mentor or therapist who can then reflect yourself back to you is also that other important piece, because that's what ends up happening in a relationship, right? If you're not self-aware, your partner's going to reflect all these things back to you, and you may believe it or you may not, right? So that's also something.
Identity it's very important of knowing who you are and what you are. Two things, for example, I had a guest where we spoke about that she was diagnosed with cancer stage 4, and she was told that she had 4 months to live. One thing a piece of advice that she left with me is the fact that sometimes it's about other people's perspectives. And for example, for men who have a low self-esteem and don't have I believe that the reason why they don't have that confidence is the fact that that one person said to them, you are not worth it, you are not man enough. Just their opinions, just their perspective. Yeah. We can't talk about men without mentioning masculinity more in depth. How societal expectation of masculinity impacts men's mental health and their approach to relationship?
I mean, it plays a huge role, right? It can set a set of expectations that can be a burden to some men, right? If the expectation is men are always the high earners, or they're always very strong and unemotional, or whatever the perspective is of masculinity that gets placed on a man, it becomes his burden unless he has his own sense of masculinity from within himself, developed from his own self-discovery, his own self-awareness, and his own internal sense of self-mastery. And that's really where the confidence comes from, of like, hey, you can tell me all these ideas about what you think a man should be, what you think a man should do, what kind of, this is a real man, this is not. But I know what kind of man I am, and that's the guy I show up as every day. And I show up in my integrity, and I don't follow, nobody. I know who I am, and I am self-led, and I am self-mastered, and every day I check myself and I show up in my own beliefs. My values inform my choices and how I show up, right? Nobody else can tell you what kind of a man you're supposed to be. You have to decide that for yourself, and then that's where your confidence shows up, right? Then like you said, if somebody else well, you're not a man, you're like, you don't even know me, right? I know me. Like, what are you saying? And that's really where that self-confidence and that healthy, sense of your mental health comes from. That, like, I know what kind of man I am, so your words don't impact me, I stand in my integrity every day. My values inform how I show up with my wife, with my children, with my parents, with my community. I get to decide what kind of man I am. And that's, to me, that's the strongest position, right? Because then you're like, nobody else can tell you nothing.
Actually, one of the things that I believe that really defines a man is